The blizzard hit with a vengeance that December afternoon in 1878, turning the Montana Territory landscape into a white hell that swallowed everything in its path. And Catherine Thorne knew with sudden, terrible certainty that she was going to die out here in this frozen wilderness, miles from anyone who might care. She had been traveling for 3 days by stagecoach from Boston, then by wagon from Helena, heading toward the small town of Walla Walla, where a man named Samuel Hutchins waited to make her his wife. Catherine had never met Samuel, had only exchanged a handful of letters arranged through a matrimonial service that promised respectable matches for respectable women. At 22 years old, with her parents dead and her brother's wife making it abundantly clear that Catherine had overstayed her welcome in their household, the advertisement for a bride had seemed like providence rather than desperation. Now, as her feet stumbled through snow that reached past her knees, as the wind cut through her wool traveling coat like it was made of paper, Catherine wondered if dying alone in a Montana blizzard might have been preferable to the slow suffocation of living on charity in Boston. The wagon driver who had agreed to take her the final 30 miles to Walla Walla had panicked when the storm rolled in with shocking speed. He had tried to turn the wagon around, but one wheel had caught on something beneath the snow, splintering with a crack that echoed even over the howling wind. The horses had bolted, still hitched to the broken wagon, dragging it and the screaming driver off into the white chaos before Catherine could even understand what was happening. She had called after him, her voice lost immediately in the storm. Then she had been alone with nothing but the small traveling bag she had managed to grab before the wagon disappeared. That had been hours ago, or perhaps only minutes. Time had lost all meaning in the relentless white, in the cold that had progressed from painful to numbing to something almost peaceful. Catherine's legs gave out. She did not remember deciding to stop walking, did not remember falling, but suddenly she was on her hands and knees in the snow, her bag lying somewhere behind her, forgotten. She tried to push herself back up, but her arms would not cooperate. The peaceful feeling was spreading through her chest now, a strange warmth that made no sense but felt so welcome after the biting cold. She collapsed fully, her cheek pressing into the snow. It did not even feel cold anymore. Through the white curtain of falling snow, she thought she saw a shape, something dark moving through all that endless white. A bear, perhaps, or a wolf. Let it be quick, she thought, and then thought nothing at all as darkness rushed in to replace the white. Wade Erickson had been ranching in Montana Territory for 6 years, ever since he had saved enough money from his work on the cattle drives to buy his own land. At 27, he had 300 acres, a small herd that would grow larger come spring, and a cabin that was sturdy enough to keep out the worst of the winter storms. He had been riding back from town when the blizzard hit, but he knew this land like he knew his own heartbeat, could navigate by instinct even when visibility dropped to nothing. He almost missed her. His horse, a steady roan mare named Juniper, shied suddenly to the left, nickering nervously. Wade trusted his horse's instincts more than his own sometimes, so he pulled her up and squinted through the snow, trying to see what had spooked her. At first, he thought it was just a fallen log, or maybe a deer that had succumbed to the cold. Then he saw the flutter of dark fabric, a shape too deliberate to be natural. Wade was off his horse before he had fully processed what he was seeing. A woman, face down in the snow, her dark hair spread around her head like a raven's wing. He dropped to his knees beside her, his gloved hands turning her over as gently as he could manage. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue, but when he pressed his fingers to her throat, he felt the flutter of a pulse. "Hey," he said, his voice rough. "Can you hear me?" No response. Her eyes did not open, her body limp as a rag doll. Wade looked around quickly, assessing the situation with the practiced efficiency of a man who had survived plenty of harsh winters. They were still 4 miles from his cabin, maybe 5 in these conditions. The woman would not survive the ride unless he could get her warm first, and even then, her chances were slim. He shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat, wrapping it around her before lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, or maybe that was just the adrenaline making her seem light. He got her positioned across Juniper's saddle, then hauled himself up behind her, pulling her back against his chest and wrapping one arm around her waist to hold her steady. "Come on, girl," he murmured to Juniper, and the horse needed no further encouragement to head for home. The ride back was brutal. Wade kept his body curved around the woman, trying to shield her from the worst of the wind. He could feel how cold she was even through all the layers of clothing between them. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he found himself talking to her, a steady stream of words that the wind snatched away, almost before they left his mouth. "Stay with me," he said, over and over like a prayer. "Just stay with me. We are almost there. You are going to be fine, just stay with me." He had no idea if she could hear him, if she was even still alive, but he kept talking anyway, kept holding her close, kept urging Juniper forward through the blinding snow. When the dark shape of his cabin finally emerged from the white, Wade felt a rush of relief so intense it was almost painful. He half fell off Juniper, pulling the woman down with him and staggering toward the door. He kicked it open, grateful that he never bothered to lock it, and carried her inside. The cabin was cold, the fire in the hearth long since burned down to ash, but it was shelter, and that was what mattered. Wade laid her on his bed, the only bed, and immediately started working to get the wet clothes off her. His hands were shaking, whether from cold or fear he could not say. Her traveling coat was soaked through, heavy with melted snow. Beneath it, she wore a dark blue dress that was equally wet, the fabric clinging to her skin. Wade knew he should care about propriety, about the impropriety of undressing an unconscious woman, but propriety would not save her life. He got her down to her undergarments, his jaw clenched, his movements as clinical as he could make them. Then he wrapped her in every blanket he owned, piling them on top of her until only her face was visible. Her lips were still blue, her face still deathly pale. Wade turned his attention to building up the fire, working quickly to get the flames roaring. The cabin began to warm slowly, too slowly. He filled a pot with water from the barrel by the door and set it on the stove to heat, then went back to the bed to check on the woman again, still unconscious. Still breathing, but barely. Wade stripped off his own wet clothes down to his union suit and made a decision that would have scandalized anyone with sense. He climbed into the bed beside her, pulling her against him, wrapping his body around hers. Skin to skin, or as close to it as he could manage with the thin layer of fabric between them. It was the fastest way to warm someone suffering from exposure, he told himself. This was about survival, nothing more. She was so cold against him that it hurt. Wade held her close, rubbing her arms, her back, trying to get her blood flowing again. He kept talking to her, that same steady stream of words. "Come on now, you have to wake up. You have made it this far, do not quit on me now. What is your name? Where were you headed? Someone must be waiting for you, someone must be worried." The hours crawled by. Wade dozed fitfully, jerking awake every few minutes to check that she was still breathing. Sometime deep in the night, he felt her stir against him, a small movement that sent hope surging through his chest. "That is it," he murmured. "Come on back." Her eyelids fluttered. Wade reached over and lit the oil lamp on the bedside table, filling the cabin with warm light. When he looked back at her, her eyes were open, though unfocused and confused. "Where?" she whispered, the word barely audible. "You are safe," Wade said quickly. "My cabin. I found you in the snow. Do you remember what happened? She blinked slowly, her brow furrowing as if thinking required immense effort. The wagon, she said. It broke the driver. Just rest, Wade said when her voice trailed off. You can explain everything later. Right now, you just need to get warm and sleep. Cold, she whispered. I know, but you are warming up, I promise. Her eyes drifted closed again, but this time it looked like sleep rather than unconsciousness. Her breathing was deeper, more regular. Wade let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He should get up, should put some distance between them now that the immediate danger had passed. But exhaustion dragged at him like a physical weight. He told himself he would just rest for a few more minutes, just until he was sure she was stable. Then he would move to the chair by the fire, would give her the bed and whatever privacy he could offer in the small cabin. But the warmth between them, the steady sound of her breathing, the sheer relief that she was alive, all conspired to pull him down into sleep. His last conscious thought was that he did not even know her name. Catherine woke to unfamiliar surroundings and a moment of pure panic. She was in a bed that was not her own, in a room she had never seen, wearing almost nothing with blankets piled on top of her. Then memory returned in a rush. The blizzard, the wagon, the endless cold, and a voice cutting through the darkness saying, "Stay with me," over and over. She turned her head and saw a man asleep beside her, his arm draped over her waist. For a wild moment, she thought about screaming, about fighting, but then she saw the exhaustion written on his face, the careful way he was positioned to warm her without taking any other liberties. This must be the man who had saved her, who had found her in the snow and brought her here. Catherine took the opportunity to study him in the gray morning light filtering through the cabin's single window. He was handsome in a rugged way, with dark hair that needed cutting and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His face was weathered by sun and wind, lined in a way that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. He looked to be in his mid to late 20s, and there was something inherently trustworthy about him, even in sleep. She must have made some sound because his eyes opened suddenly, alert despite having been asleep just seconds before. They were blue, she noticed, the color of the sky on a clear summer day. "You are awake," he said, and she heard relief in his voice. "How do you feel?" "Cold," Catherine admitted. "But better than I did, I think. It is hard to remember." "You almost died," the man said bluntly, pushing himself up on one elbow but keeping a respectful distance now that she was conscious. "I found you collapsed in the snow yesterday afternoon. You have been unconscious most of the time since." "You saved my life," Catherine said, the reality of it hitting her. "Thank you. I do not even know your name. Wade Erickson. This is my land, my cabin." "Catherine Thorne," she said. "I was traveling to Walla Walla. I am supposed to marry a man there." Something flickered across Wade's face, too quick for her to identify. A mail-order bride, Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, though she was not sure why she should feel shame about it. "Yes, Samuel Hutchins arranged for my passage. We have been corresponding for 3 months." Wade nodded slowly, then seemed to realize they were still in bed together. He cleared his throat and climbed out, turning his back to give her some privacy. "I will get the fire built up," he said. "Your clothes were soaked through. I hung them to dry, but I do not know how well they fared. I can lend you some of mine until yours are wearable again." "Thank you," Catherine said softly. She watched him cross to the fireplace, admiring despite herself the way he moved, all lean muscle and casual grace. He was wearing only a union suit, and she quickly averted her eyes, feeling heat in her face again for an entirely different reason. Wade got the fire roaring, then dug through a trunk at the foot of the bed and pulled out a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers. "These will be too big," he said, still not looking at her, "but they are warm and dry." "I appreciate it," Catherine said. Wade crossed to the far side of the cabin, making a show of examining the window latch and giving her privacy to dress. Catherine struggled into the clothes, her fingers clumsy and still not quite working right. The shirt hung nearly to her knees, and she had to roll the trouser legs up several times, but Wade was right about one thing: they were warm. "All right," she said, and he turned back around. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You look like a little girl playing dress-up." Catherine could not help but smile back. "I look ridiculous, but I am grateful nonetheless." Wade busied himself making coffee and frying up salt pork and eggs. Catherine sat at the small table watching him work. The cabin was sparse but clean, everything in its place. A man used to taking care of himself, she thought. "How long was I out there?" she asked. "Before you found me, I mean." Wade glanced at her as he stirred the eggs. "Hard to say. Your wagon driver made it to town late yesterday, half frozen himself and raving about losing a passenger in the storm. I was just leaving when he arrived. I went out looking, but in that visibility, I was mostly riding blind and hoping to get lucky." He paused. "You are lucky my horse spooked. I would have ridden right past you otherwise." Catherine absorbed this, understanding just how close she had come to dying alone in the snow. "Where is Walla Walla from here?" "About 4 miles southwest. Not far in good weather, but that storm was a bad one. It blew itself out overnight, but there is going to be a lot of snow on the ground for a while." "I should let Mr. Hutchins know I am alive," Catherine said. "He will be worried." Wade's expression was carefully neutral as he served up the food. "Roads will not be passable for a few days at least. You are welcome to stay here until they clear." "I could not impose," Catherine said automatically, though in truth she had no idea what else she would do. "It is not an imposition," Wade said firmly. "You are not well enough to travel anyway. You need to rest, build your strength back up." Catherine wanted to argue but found she could not. The simple act of getting dressed had left her exhausted and her head was starting to ache. "Just for a day or two," she said, "until the road's clear." "As long as you need," Wade said, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. But his expression gave nothing away as he sat down across from her with his own plate. They ate in companionable silence. The food was simple but good, and Catherine realized she was ravenous. When was the last time she had eaten? She could not remember. "Tell me about this Samuel Hutchins," Wade said suddenly. "What do you know about him?" Catherine set down her fork, considering. "He is 34 years old. He owns a general store in Walla Walla. He has been a widower for 2 years. His letters were very kind, very proper." "Have you seen a photograph?" "No. He said he does not have one." "Why do you ask?" Wade shrugged, but there was something tense in his shoulders. "Just making conversation. It is a big step, marrying a stranger." "No bigger than any other marriage, I suppose," Catherine said, though she wondered if she really believed that. "Most people barely know each other when they marry. At least Samuel and I have been honest in our letters." "Have you?" Wade asked quietly. "Been honest, I mean, in both directions." Catherine frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing," Wade said quickly. "I am sure he is a fine man. I do not know him well, but I have heard he runs a good business." "But," Catherine prompted, hearing the unspoken word. Wade met her eyes. "But I do not think you should rush into anything. Take some time. Get to know him properly before you commit to anything permanent." "I crossed half a continent to marry him," Catherine pointed out. "I gave up everything I had in Boston. I do not exactly have the luxury of taking my time." "What if he is not the man you think he is?" "What if he is exactly the man I think he is, and we have a perfectly pleasant life together?" Catherine countered, feeling defensive though she could not say why. "Not everyone needs grand passion, Mr. Erickson. Sometimes companionship and security are enough." Wade looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. He pushed back from the table and started gathering up the dishes. "You should rest. You have been through an ordeal." Catherine wanted to protest that she was fine, but another wave of exhaustion washed over her. "Maybe for a little while," she admitted. She made her way back to the bed, and Wade did not object. Within minutes of lying down, she was asleep again, her body demanding the rest it needed to heal. Over the next 3 days, a strange domesticity settled over the cabin. The snow outside was deep, drifted in places to heights of 5 or 6 feet. Wade had to dig a path to the barn where he kept Juniper and 2 milk cows. He did the outdoor work while Catherine slowly regained her strength, helping with cooking and mending a pile of his shirts that had been languishing in a basket. They talked as they worked, tentative at first but with growing ease. Wade told her about growing up in Kansas, about working cattle drives as a teenager, about saving every penny until he could afford to buy land of his own. Catherine told him about Boston, about her parents dying within a year of each other from influenza, about her brother Jonathan who meant well but whose wife Agatha had made Catherine's life quietly miserable with 1,000 small cruelties disguised as concern. She would tell everyone how worried she was about me, Catherine said one afternoon as she darned a sock. Poor Catherine, she would say, so dependent on others, such a burden, and then she would smile like she had just paid me a compliment. Sounds like a real peach, Wade said dryly from where he sat oiling his saddle. Catherine surprised herself by laughing. That is one way to put it. Jonathan never noticed, or maybe he did and it was easier to pretend he did not. Either way, when the advertisement came for brides willing to travel west, it felt like an answer to a prayer. Even knowing you would be marrying a complete stranger. Even then, Catherine confirmed. She paused, her needle stilling. Do you think that makes me foolish? Wade looked up, his expression serious. I think it makes you brave. Desperate, maybe, but brave too. It takes courage to start over. Is that what you were doing when you came here, starting over? Something like that, Wade admitted. I wanted land of my own, wanted to build something that was mine. But I was also running from some things. My father had plans for me, plans that did not involve ranching in Montana. We did not part on the best of terms. Do you regret it? Wade considered this. No. I miss him sometimes, but I do not regret building this life. It is hard work and lonely, but it is mine. Lonely, Catherine repeated softly. Is that why you have never married? I was focused on the ranch, Wade said, but something in his tone suggested there was more to it than that. And there are not exactly a lot of eligible women out here. Most of the families that have settled in the area have young children, no one old enough for courting. And I am not the type to sweet-talk a girl away from her family for my own sake. You could have done what Samuel did, Catherine pointed out. Put in an advertisement for a bride. Wade made a non-committal sound and went back to oiling the saddle with perhaps more force than necessary. Catherine watched him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the set of his jaw. Before she could pursue the subject further, Wade stood abruptly. I need to check on the horses, he said, and was out the door before Catherine could respond. She sat staring after him, her hands idle in her lap. Something about the conversation had touched a nerve, but she could not quite identify what. Wade had been nothing but kind to her, respectful and generous. He had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. And yet there were moments when she caught him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something intense, and quickly shuddered. Catherine told herself it did not matter. In a few days, the roads would be clear enough for Wade to take her to town, where she would meet Samuel Hutchins and begin her new life as his wife. Whatever strange tension existed between her and Wade was irrelevant, a product of circumstance and close quarters and nothing more. But that night, as she lay in Wade's bed while he slept on a makeshift pallet on the floor, Catherine found herself staring at the ceiling and wondering what might have happened if she had met Wade Erickson before she had ever written to Samuel Hutchins. On the fourth morning, Wade announced that the roads should be passable now. I will take you into town today, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Get you settled with Hutchins. Catherine felt a strange sinking in her stomach that she refused to examine too closely. That would be appreciated, she said, proud that her voice came out steady. They rode double on Juniper, Catherine sitting in front with Wade's arms around her to hold the reins. It was more intimate than anything they had shared in the cabin, and Catherine found herself hyper-aware of every point of contact between their bodies. Wade's chest against her back, his thighs bracketing hers, his breath stirring her hair. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Catherine lied. "Just nervous about meeting Samuel, I suppose." Wade said nothing, but his arms tightened fractionally around her. The ride to Walla Walla took just under 2 hours. The town was small, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street that was currently churned into muddy slush by foot and wagon traffic. People bundled in heavy coats hurried from building to building, and smoke rose from a dozen chimneys into the pale winter sky. Wade guided Juniper to a stop in front of a building with a sign reading Hutchins General Store. Catherine felt her heart rate pick up. This was it. The moment she had been traveling toward for weeks, the beginning of her new life. Wade dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. His hands spanned her waist, and for a moment they stood very close, her hands on his shoulders, his eyes searching her face. "Catherine," he started, then seemed to think better of whatever he had been about to say. "Good luck," he finished instead. Before Catherine could respond, the door to the store opened and a man emerged. He was tall and thin, with sandy hair going gray at the temples and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes were a pale gray, and he wore a suit that looked expensive but ill-fitting. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice carrying a faint note of surprise. "They told me you had perished in the storm." "Nearly," Catherine said, stepping away from Wade and smoothing down her skirt. She was back in her own clothes, cleaned and mended as best as Wade could manage. "Mr. Hutchins, I presume." "Samuel, please," he said, coming forward and taking her hand. His grip was dry and brief. "And you are alive and well. This is excellent news. I had already composed a letter to your brother explaining the tragic circumstances." "I am sorry to have caused you worry," Catherine said. "The wagon broke and I was lost in the storm. Mr. Erickson found me and cared for me until the roads were passable." Samuel turned his attention to Wade for the first time, his pale eyes assessing. "Erickson? Yes, I know you, I think. The rancher out on the Turner place." "That is right," Wade said evenly. "Well, I am in your debt for returning my intended safely," Samuel said, though his tone suggested the debt was a minor one. "I trust she was no trouble." "No trouble at all," Wade said, his jaw tight. Samuel nodded absently, his attention already back on Catherine. "You must be exhausted from your ordeal. Come inside and warm yourself. We have much to discuss regarding the wedding arrangements." "The wedding," Catherine repeated faintly. Beside her, Wade had gone very still. "Yes, of course," Samuel said, looking puzzled. "Unless you wish to postpone. I had thought we might marry this Saturday at the church. The circuit preacher will be in town, a fortunate coincidence." "This Saturday," Catherine said. "That was only 2 days away." She looked at Wade helplessly, not even sure what she was asking him, but his expression had gone carefully blank. "I should be going," Wade said. "I have stock to tend to." "Wait," Catherine said, but he was already mounting Juniper. "Goodbye, Catherine," he said, and there was something final in the way he said her name. Then he wheeled the horse around and rode away without looking back. Catherine watched him go, feeling like something vital was being torn away from her. Which was insane, she told herself firmly. She had known Wade Erickson for 4 days. She had been planning to marry Samuel Hutchins for 3 months. Nothing had changed. "Miss Thorne," Samuel said, and Catherine realized he had been speaking to her. "I am sorry," she said, dragging her attention back to him. "What were you saying?" "I was suggesting we go inside," Samuel repeated, a note of impatience creeping into his voice. "You are drawing attention standing out here." Catherine glanced around and realized he was right. Several people had stopped to stare at them. She allowed Samuel to usher her into the store, but as the door closed behind her, she found herself looking back through the window at the muddy street, at the place where Wade had been, feeling like she had just made a terrible mistake. The general store was well stocked and organized with military precision. Dry goods lined one wall, household items another. There was a small pot-bellied stove in the center that threw welcome heat, and a counter running along the back where Samuel conducted business. A young clerk was sweeping in the corner, and he looked up with curiosity when they entered. "Tommy, take over the front," Samuel instructed. "I will be in the back room with Miss Thorne." He guided Catherine through a door behind the counter into a small office. It was neat to the point of being austere, with a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet. A small window looked out onto the alley behind the building. Samuel gestured for Catherine to sit, then took the chair behind the desk. "I must admit, you are not quite what I expected," Samuel said, studying her with those pale eyes. Catherine felt herself tense. "In what way?" "You are younger than I imagined," he said, "and prettier. Your letters gave the impression of a much more serious, plain sort of woman." "I am serious," Catherine said, not sure if she should feel complimented or insulted. "And I never claimed to be a beauty." "No, you did not," Samuel agreed. "You were quite honest about your circumstances. An orphan, dependent on a brother who cannot afford to keep you indefinitely. No prospects, no dowry. Quite desperate, in fact." Catherine felt heat rise in her face. "I was honest because I believed you deserved honesty," she said stiffly. "If my circumstances are not acceptable to you, I can make other arrangements." "No, no," Samuel said, waving a hand dismissively. "I appreciate your honesty, truly. I am merely stating facts. You need a husband and I need a wife. It is a practical arrangement that will benefit us both." "And your previous wife?" Catherine asked, trying to turn the conversation away from her own desperation. "You mentioned in your letters that she passed away 2 years ago." Samuel's expression did not change. "Martha died of pneumonia. She was a good woman, a hard worker. I hope you will be equally diligent." Something about the way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so devoid of any real emotion, made Catherine uneasy. "You must miss her," she said carefully. "I miss having someone to manage the household," Samuel said. "Martha was very efficient. This place has needed a woman's touch since she passed." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Which brings me to the practical matters we need to discuss. The wedding will be Saturday at 2 o'clock. After the ceremony, you will move into the quarters above the store with me. I expect you to help with the business during the day and manage the household in the evenings. I will provide you with a modest allowance for personal items. In return, I expect you to be a dutiful wife. Do you have any questions?" Catherine had about 1,000 questions, none of which she thought Samuel would appreciate. "What about children?" she asked instead. "Do you want a family? If God sees fit to bless us, I will not object," Samuel said. "But I am not a young man, and I will not be disappointed if we remain childless." The cold, transactional way he discussed their future life together made Catherine feel ill. This was nothing like the kind letters he had written, letters that had spoken of companionship and mutual respect and building a life together. This felt more like a business arrangement, or worse, like she was being hired for a position. "I need some time to think," Catherine said, standing abruptly. Samuel frowned. "What is there to think about? We have an agreement. You came all this way for the express purpose of marrying me." "I know," Catherine said, "but I have just been through a traumatic experience, Mr. Hutchins. I nearly died. Surely you can understand that I need a little time to collect myself before making such a permanent commitment." Samuel's frown deepened, but after a moment he nodded curtly. "I suppose that is reasonable. Mrs. Chen runs a boarding house down the street. I will arrange a room for you there until Saturday. Will 2 days be sufficient for you to collect yourself?" "Yes," Catherine said, though she had no idea if that was true. "Thank you for your understanding." Samuel stood and came around the desk. For one horrible moment, Catherine thought he might try to kiss her, but instead he merely took her hand and shook it firmly, like she was a business partner. "I will send Tommy to show you to Mrs. Chen's," he said. "Get some rest, Miss Thorne. I will call on you tomorrow evening, and we can finalize the arrangements." Catherine nodded and fled the office, feeling like she could not breathe. The young clerk, Tommy, materialized at her elbow, chattering cheerfully as he led her out of the store and down the street to a neat white house with a sign proclaiming it Chen's boarding house. Mrs. Chen was a small Chinese woman who spoke English with a heavy accent, but whose warm smile needed no translation. She showed Catherine to a small but clean room on the second floor, accepted the coins that Samuel had pressed into Tommy's hand for payment, and left Catherine alone with instructions that dinner would be served at 6. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed and tried to sort through the chaos of her thoughts. Samuel Hutchins was not the man she had expected. His letters had been warm, even poetic at times. The man she had just met was cold and calculating, viewing their marriage as nothing more than a business transaction. But what had she expected, really? She had answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride. She had always known this would be a practical arrangement rather than a love match. Samuel was offering her security, a home, a position in society. That was more than she had in Boston, more than she would have anywhere else. So why did the thought of marrying him on Saturday fill her with such dread? She knew why, though she did not want to admit it. Wade Erickson. 4 days in a cabin with a near stranger, and somehow he had become the measure against which she was judging Samuel Hutchins. Wade, who had held her through the night to keep her from freezing, who had talked to her like she was a person worth talking to rather than just a problem to be managed, who had looked at her with warmth in his eyes and made her feel, for the first time in years, like she mattered to someone. Catherine lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. She was being foolish. Wade had been kind to her because he was a kind man, not because he had any particular feeling for her. He had brought her to town and delivered her to Samuel without protest, had ridden away without a backward glance. And even if he did have feelings for her, what difference did it make? She had an agreement with Samuel. She had no money, no way to support herself. She could not impose on Wade's generosity any longer, could not expect him to take responsibility for her just because she found herself attracted to him. No, she would marry Samuel Hutchins on Saturday as planned. She would be a dutiful wife, manage his household, work in his store, and in time she would forget about Wade Erickson and the strange intimacy they had shared during those snowbound days. She would make the best of the life she had chosen, because that was what practical, sensible women did. Having decided this, Catherine waited to feel some sense of relief or resolution. Instead, she just felt empty. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, there was a soft knock at the door and Mrs. Chen's voice calling that dinner was ready. Catherine washed her face in the basin on the dresser and made her way downstairs to a cheerful dining room where several other boarders were already gathered around a large table. Mrs. Chen introduced her around. There was a traveling salesman named Mr. Peters, an elderly widow named Mrs. Abernathy, and a young schoolteacher named Miss Sarah Green, who was in town temporarily while the schoolhouse in her usual district was being repaired. The conversation over dinner was pleasant and helped distract Catherine from her troubled thoughts. Miss Green was particularly friendly, a lively woman about Catherine's own age with red hair and a smattering of freckles across her nose. "You are Samuel Hutchins's intended," Sarah said, not bothering to lower her voice. "The whole town has been gossiping about you." "Sarah, Mrs. Chen said reproachfully, though she did not sound particularly surprised. "What? It is true," Sarah said unrepentantly. A mail-order bride is exciting news in a town this size, especially after they thought you had died in the storm. Someone said Wade Erickson found you half frozen and took you back to his place to recover. Is that true? Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. Mr. Erickson did save my life, yes. He was kind enough to shelter me until the roads were passable. Oh, Wade is a good man, Sarah said, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. And very handsome, do not you think? Half the unmarried women in the territory would set their caps for him if he ever came to town more than once a month. I did not really notice, Catherine lied, and Sarah laughed. Well, you will have to make do with Samuel Hutchins instead, Sarah said. Not quite as easy on the eyes, but he is a successful businessman. His first wife was a friend of mine, actually. Martha was a sweet woman, though between you and me, I always thought Samuel ran her ragged. Sarah, Mrs. Abernathy said sharply. That is not an appropriate thing to say to Miss Thorne. Why not? Sarah said. Better she knows what she is getting into. Samuel is the type who likes everything just so. Martha used to tell me she felt more like an employee than a wife. Mrs. Chen cleared her throat meaningfully, and Sarah subsided, though she gave Catherine a sympathetic look across the table. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Catherine found her appetite had fled. Was that what her marriage would be like? Years of being managed and directed, valued only for her usefulness, after dinner, Catherine pleaded tiredness and retreated to her room. She stood at the window, looking out at the darkened street. Somewhere out there, 4 miles away, Wade Erickson was probably sitting in his cabin, maybe reading or working on some task by lamplight. Was he thinking about her at all? Or had he already dismissed her from his mind, just another person passing briefly through his life? Catherine pressed her forehead against the cold glass and tried not to cry. The next day dawned clear and cold. Catherine had barely slept, her mind churning through endless circles of doubt and obligation. She dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a gray wool that was somber and respectable, and went downstairs for breakfast. Sarah Green was already at the table, and she brightened when she saw Catherine. I was hoping to catch you, she said. I have to go out to the Peterson farm this morning to check on young Davy, who has been ill. Would you like to come along for the ride? It might do you good to see some of the countryside in daylight, and the Petersons are lovely people. Catherine hesitated. Samuel had said he would call on her this evening, but he had not forbidden her from leaving the boarding house before then. And the thought of spending another day trapped in her room with her own thoughts was unbearable. I would like that, she said. Thank you. They borrowed a small buggy from Mrs. Chen's neighbor and set out, with Sarah handling the reins competently. The day was beautiful despite the cold, the sky a brilliant blue and the snow-covered landscape sparkling in the sunlight. You do not seem very happy for a woman about to be married, Sarah observed once they were clear of town. Catherine debated how much to say, but there was something about Sarah's open, friendly manner that invited confidence. I am not sure I am doing the right thing, she admitted. Marrying Samuel, you mean? Yes, he seems like a good man, but I do not know if we suit one another. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her attention apparently focused on guiding the horse around a patch of ice. Then she said, Can I tell you something, as someone who considers herself your friend even though we just met, please? Samuel Hutchins is not a bad man, Sarah said carefully, but he is a hard man and a cold one. He will provide for you, give you security and respectability. But I do not think he will ever make you happy, and I think you know that already. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. What choice do I have? I have no money, no way to support myself. I cannot return to Boston. My brother made it clear I had worn out my welcome. You could stay here, Sarah suggested. Not with Samuel, I mean. There are other options. Mrs. Chen is always looking for help at the boarding house. It would not pay much, but it would be honest work, and you would have your independence. and live as a charity case, dependent on the kindness of near strangers. Catherine shook her head. I have been dependent on others for too long, Sarah. At least as Samuel's wife, I would have a defined role, a place in society. Even if you are miserable, Catherine had no answer for that. They reached the Peterson farm, and Sarah's attention turned to her young patient. The boy was recovering from a bad cold, and Sarah checked him over with practiced efficiency while chatting cheerfully with his mother. Catherine sat in the warm kitchen and drank tea and felt worlds away from her troubles. On the ride back to town, Sarah tried a different tack. "What about Wade Erickson?" she asked casually. "Did you form any attachment to him during your time at his cabin?" Catherine's hands clenched in her lap. "That is not a relevant question. I am engaged to Samuel." "But if you were not," Sarah persisted, "would you consider Wade?" "I do not know what Wade would want," Catherine said, her voice tight, "and it does not matter. I have an obligation to Samuel." "Catherine," Sarah said gently, pulling the buggy to a stop. They were on a small rise overlooking the valley, the town of Walla Walla visible in the distance. "Listen to me. I know you feel like you have no choices, but that is not true. You are a smart, capable woman. Yes, it would be hard to make your own way, but it would be possible. And if you have feelings for Wade Erickson, if you think there might be something real there, do not throw that away just because you feel obligated to honor an agreement with a man you barely know." "I barely know Wade either," Catherine pointed out. "But you like him," Sarah said. "I can see it in your face when you talk about him. You do not light up like that when you mention Samuel." Catherine looked out over the snow-covered valley, her throat tight. "Even if what you are saying is true," she said quietly, "Wade has not asked me to stay. He brought me to town and left without a word. I think the message there is quite clear. Or maybe he is being honorable," Sarah suggested. "Maybe he knows you came here to marry Samuel, and he is trying not to interfere with that. Men can be idiotic about honor sometimes." Despite herself, Catherine laughed, though it came out watery. "What are you suggesting I do?" "Talk to him," Sarah said simply. "Before you marry Samuel, go talk to Wade. Find out if what you are feeling is real or just gratitude for him saving your life. And find out if he feels the same way. Then, whatever you decide, at least you will know you made a real choice instead of just letting circumstances carry you along." Catherine wanted to argue, wanted to insist that it was impossible, improper, insane. But instead she found herself nodding slowly. "How would I even get out to his ranch? I do not know the way and I do not have a horse." Sarah grinned. "Leave that to me. I will come by the boarding house first thing tomorrow morning. We will tell Mrs. Chen we are going visiting, which is true in a way. Sarah, I cannot ask you to be part of this deception." "You are not asking. I am volunteering," Sarah said firmly. "Now come on. Let's get back to town before Mrs. Chen starts to worry." That evening, Samuel Hutchins called at the boarding house precisely at 7 o'clock. Mrs. Chen showed him into the small parlor where Catherine was waiting, then discreetly withdrew. Samuel sat in the chair across from Catherine, his posture perfect, his expression pleasantly neutral. "I trust you have had time to rest and recover," he said. "Yes, thank you," Catherine said. "Good. Then we can proceed with the wedding as planned on Saturday." It was not a question, Catherine noted. He had already decided, was simply informing her of what would happen. She took a breath, trying to find the courage Sarah seemed to think she possessed. "Mr. Hutchins, Samuel, I wonder if we might discuss the nature of our marriage in more detail," she said. "What is there to discuss? I outlined the terms yesterday." "Yes, you did," Catherine agreed, "but perhaps we could talk about expectations beyond the practical. About companionship, affection, partnership." Samuel looked genuinely puzzled. "I expect we will get along adequately, Miss Thorne. We are both reasonable adults. As for affection, I am sure a mutual regard will develop over time." "But what if it does not?" Catherine pressed. "What if we find we do not suit one another? Then, "We will manage regardless," Samuel said with a hint of impatience. "Miss Thorne, I was under the impression that you understood the nature of this arrangement. You are not in a position to be particular about romantic considerations. I am offering you a respectable marriage and a comfortable home. That should be sufficient." His bluntness was like a slap. Catherine felt anger spark to life, burning away some of the uncertainty that had been plaguing her. "You are right," she said coldly. "I am not in a position to be particular. But perhaps you are not in a position to be quite so presumptuous. You are not the only option available to a woman in my circumstances." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "Is that so? And what other options do you imagine you have?" Catherine stood, her back straight. "That is my concern, Mr. Hutchins. I will give you my answer tomorrow morning. Until then, I think it is best that you leave." Samuel stood as well, his expression tight with displeasure. "If you are attempting to negotiate for better terms, Miss Thorne, I advise you to reconsider. I do not respond well to manipulation." "I am not attempting to manipulate anyone," Catherine said. "I am simply trying to make an informed decision about my future. Surely you can understand that." Samuel studied her for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Very well. I will expect your answer by noon tomorrow. But I warn you, Miss Thorne, if you decline my offer, I will not make it again. You will have to find your own way in the world." "I understand," Catherine said, and she realized she did. She understood that Samuel Hutchins viewed her as a commodity, something useful to be acquired and managed. She understood that he would never see her as a partner, never value her beyond her utility. And she understood that marrying him would be a slow death of the spirit, even if it provided security for the body. After Samuel left, Catherine sat back down in the parlor, her hands shaking slightly. She had just burned a bridge, or at least singed it badly. If things did not work out with Wade, if tomorrow proved to be a fool's errand, she would have nothing. No husband, no home, no prospects. But somehow the fear that should have come with that realization did not materialize. Instead, Catherine felt a strange sense of lightness, like a weight she had not realized she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. Sarah Green was right. Catherine had choices. Maybe none of them were easy, maybe all of them carried risk, but they were hers to make. And for the first time since she had left Boston, Catherine felt like she was truly in control of her own destiny. True to her word, Sarah appeared at the boarding house at 8 o'clock the next morning, driving the same buggy they had used the day before. Catherine was waiting, dressed in her warmest clothes and carrying nothing but a small reticule. "Ready?" Sarah asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "Ready," Catherine confirmed, climbing up into the buggy. The ride out to Wade's ranch took longer than Catherine expected. The roads were rough, still muddy from the melting snow, and Sarah had to navigate carefully to keep the buggy from getting stuck. As they drove, Catherine felt her nervousness growing. What would she say to Wade? What if he did not feel the same way she did? What if Sarah was wrong, and his kindness had been nothing more than common decency toward someone in need? "Stop thinking so hard," Sarah said, glancing over at her. "I can hear you worrying from here." "What if this is a mistake?" Catherine said. "Then you learn from it and move on," Sarah said pragmatically. "But you will never know unless you try. And Catherine, I have known Wade Erickson for 3 years. He does not bring women to his cabin, does not let people get close. The fact that he let you in at all, that says something. It says he is a kind man who did not want me to freeze to death," Catherine said. "If that was all it was, he would have taken you straight to town the next day as soon as the storm cleared," Sarah pointed out. "Instead, he kept you there for 3 more days. Why do you think that is?" Catherine had no answer for that, but hope was starting to bloom in her chest, fragile and terrifying. Wade's ranch came into view, the cabin and barn looking small and sturdy against the vast Montana landscape. Smoke was rising from the cabin's chimney, so he was home. Sarah pulled the buggy to a stop in front of the cabin and gave Catherine an encouraging smile. "Go on. I will wait here." Catherine climbed down on shaking legs and walked to the cabin door. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What if this was a terrible idea? What if she was about to make a fool of herself? Before she could lose her nerve entirely, the door swung open. Wade stood there, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw her. "Catherine," he said, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," Catherine said, her voice steadier than she felt. "May I come in?" Wade stepped back wordlessly, and Catherine entered the cabin. It looked exactly as she remembered, neat and spare and somehow welcoming. The smell of coffee hung in the air, and there was a book open on the table, one of the few personal touches in the space. Wade closed the door and leaned against it, his arms crossed over his chest. He was watching her warily, like she was a wild animal that might bolt at any moment. "I am supposed to marry Samuel Hutchins tomorrow," Catherine said, deciding to start with the most important fact. "I know," Wade said, his expression carefully neutral. "But I do not want to," Catherine continued. "I do not want to marry him. I do not think I ever really did. I was just so desperate to escape my circumstances that I was willing to accept any offer that came along." Wade was very still. "What changed?" "You," Catherine said simply. "These last few days, all I can think about is the time I spent here, the way you made me feel safe and valued and seen. The way we talked to each other, like equals, like friends. I do not know if what I am feeling is real or just gratitude, but I know I do not want to marry Samuel without at least trying to find out." Wade pushed off from the door, taking a step toward her, then stopping himself. "Catherine, you do not owe me anything. I did what anyone would have done." "No," Catherine said firmly. "You did more than that. You were kind to me, Wade. You treated me with respect and gentleness. And I think maybe you felt something too. Am I wrong?" Wade's carefully maintained composure cracked. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression tortured. "What do you want me to say?" he asked roughly. "That I have been thinking about you every minute since I left you in town. That I barely slept last night imagining you marrying Hutchins. That the thought of him touching you makes me want to punch something," Catherine's breath caught. "Yes," she whispered. "That is exactly what I want you to say." Wade closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands came up to frame her face, his blue eyes intense and searching. "I am not a rich man, Catherine. I cannot offer you a fine house in town or an easy life. This ranch is everything I have, and some years it barely makes enough to get by. You would be a rancher's wife, and that means hard work and long winters and loneliness sometimes." "I do not care about any of that," Catherine said, her hands coming up to grip his wrists. "I care about you. I care about being with someone who sees me as a person, not a possession. I care about building a life with someone I could maybe fall in love with. Maybe." Wade said, and there was a hint of a smile tugging at his lips despite the seriousness of the moment. "I have only known you for 4 days," Catherine pointed out. "I am trying to be realistic." "Realistic," Wade repeated. Then he laughed, a short, breathless sound. "Catherine Thorne, there is nothing realistic about what I am feeling right now." "What are you feeling?" Catherine asked, even though her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. "I am feeling like I want to kiss you," Wade said bluntly. "I am feeling like I found something precious in that blizzard, and I was an idiot to let you go. I am feeling like if you will have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Then kiss me," she said. Wade did not need to be told twice. He kissed her gently at first, almost tentatively, like he was afraid she might disappear. But when Catherine's arms came up around his neck, when she pressed closer and kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the last few days, the kiss deepened, becoming something fierce and claiming and utterly right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he said, echoing the words he had said over and over when he found her in the snow. "Not just today, stay with me forever." "Yes," Catherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will stay with you." Behind them, there was a discreet cough from the doorway. They both turned to find Sarah Green standing there, grinning like a cat who had caught a particularly fat mouse. "I hate to interrupt," Sarah said, not sounding remotely apologetic, "but if you are planning to marry Catherine before Samuel figures out what is happening, we should probably make some practical arrangements." Wade kept one arm around Catherine's waist, like he was afraid she might drift away if he let go. "What did you have in mind?" "The circuit preacher is still in town," Sarah said. "He is supposed to marry Catherine and Samuel tomorrow, but I bet we could convince him to marry you and Catherine today instead. We would need witnesses, and you would have to go to the courthouse to file the paperwork, but it could be done." Catherine looked up at Wade. "Is that too fast?" "We could wait, get to know each other better." "I have waited my whole life for you," Wade said, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not want to wait another day if I do not have to." "Neither do I," Catherine admitted. "Well then," Sarah said briskly, "we had better get moving." "Catherine, you will ride with me. Wade, you follow on your horse. We will meet at the church in an hour." Everything after that happened in a blur. They raced back to town, Wade riding alongside the buggy on Juniper. When they reached Walla Walla, Sarah drove straight to the church while Wade headed to find the preacher. Mrs. Chen, when informed of the change in plans, was delighted. She insisted on giving Catherine a beautiful shawl to wear, cream-colored lace that had belonged to her own mother. Sarah stood up as Catherine's witness, and Wade recruited Tommy from the general store to be his. The ceremony was simple and quick, conducted in the small church with winter sunlight streaming through the windows. Catherine wore her gray dress with Mrs. Chen's shawl, and she had never felt more beautiful in her life. Wade wore his best shirt and vest, his hair slicked back with water, and he could not stop smiling. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Wade kissed Catherine with such tenderness that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. This was what marriage was supposed to feel like, she thought. Not a business transaction, but a joining of two people who chose each other, who saw each other clearly and wanted to build a life together anyway. They were just leaving the church when Samuel Hutchins appeared, his face red with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, looking from Catherine to Wade to the preacher. "I am sorry, Samuel," Catherine said, and she meant it, "but I cannot marry you. I do not love you, and I do not think you love me. We would have made each other miserable." "We had an agreement," Samuel said coldly. "And I am breaking it," Catherine said. "I will understand if you want to seek compensation for the money you spent on my passage from Boston. I do not have the funds now, but I will find a way to repay you." "I do not want your money," Samuel said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I want you to understand that you have made a terrible mistake. Erickson has nothing to offer you. You will regret this." "I do not think I will," Catherine said quietly. "Goodbye, Samuel. I hope you find someone who will make you happy." Wade put a protective arm around Catherine and steered her away from Samuel. As they walked down the church steps, Catherine heard Samuel shouting after them, but she did not look back. They spent their first night as husband and wife in Catherine's room at the boarding house, since Wade's cabin was too far to reach before dark. Mrs. Chen insisted on making them a special dinner, and Sarah toasted them with plum wine, declaring it the most romantic thing she had ever seen. Later, alone in their room, Wade held Catherine close and whispered, "Are you sure? Really sure? Because there is still time to change your mind." "I have never been more sure of anything," Catherine said. She kissed him, soft and sweet, and felt him relax against her. They made love for the first time that night, tentative and careful with each other, learning the language of touch and pleasure. Wade was gentle, attentive, making sure Catherine felt safe and cherished. And when they lay tangled together afterward, Catherine felt a profound sense of rightness, like she had finally found the place where she belonged. The next morning, they packed up Catherine's few belongings and headed out to the ranch. The ride was cold but clear, and Catherine felt her spirits lift as they left the town behind. This was her life now. This vast Montana landscape, this quiet, steady man beside her. It was not what she had planned, not what she had expected, but it was so much better than what she had almost settled for. Over the following weeks and months, Catherine settled into her new life. She learned to manage the household, to cook on the wood stove, to tend the garden Wade helped her plant when spring finally arrived. She learned to milk the cows, to collect eggs from the chickens Wade bought for her, to mend fences and haul water and do 100 other tasks that were nothing like her life in Boston. It was hard work, harder than Catherine had ever done before. Some nights she fell into bed exhausted, her hands rough and her back aching. But it was her work, her life, built with her own hands and her own choices. And at the end of every day, Wade was there, steady and warm and increasingly dear to her. Their love grew slowly and surely, like something planted deep that sent down roots before showing any growth above ground. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's moods. Catherine learned that Wade liked his coffee strong and his eggs over easy, that he hummed tunelessly when he was content, that he had nightmares sometimes about his father and would wake up tense and upset until Catherine held him. Wade learned that Catherine had a sharp wit and a ready laugh, that she read voraciously and missed having access to books, that she sometimes got homesick for Boston, despite hating her life there. He started making the trip to town more frequently, always returning with a new book borrowed from Sarah or the minister. He built Catherine a bookshelf for her birthday, a beautiful piece of furniture that he had spent weeks on in secret. Summer came, turning the Montana landscape into an ocean of grass and wildflowers. Wade taught Catherine to ride, putting her on the gentlest of his horses and leading her around the property until she got comfortable with the rhythm. Soon, she was riding out with him to check on the cattle, reveling in the freedom of movement in the vast sky overhead. Fall arrived with a riot of color, and they worked together to prepare for winter. They put up preserves from the garden, stocked the root cellar, cut firewood and stacked it high against the side of the cabin. Catherine found herself thinking about the blizzard that had brought her here, and she felt nothing but gratitude for the storm that had nearly killed her, but had led her to Wade. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Wade reached over and took Catherine's hand. "I need to tell you something," he said. Catherine set aside her sewing, her attention fully on him. "What is it?" "I knew," Wade said quietly. "When I found you in the snow, when I carried you back here and spent those days taking care of you, I already knew. You were supposed to marry Hutchins, and I knew I should take you straight to him as soon as the roads were clear. But I kept finding reasons to wait one more day. I told myself you needed more time to recover, that it would be dangerous to move you too soon. But the truth is, I was already falling in love with you, and I was not ready to let you go." Catherine squeezed his hand. "I am glad you waited," she said softly. "If you had taken me to town that first day, I might have married Samuel. I might never have realized there was another choice." "I almost told you," Wade admitted. "That day when I did finally take you to town, I almost told you how I felt, almost asked you to stay. But I thought that would be selfish. You had traveled all that way to marry Hutchins. I had no right to interfere." "Sarah told me the same thing," Catherine said. "That you were probably being honorable. I thought you did not care." "I cared," Wade said, his voice rough. "God, Catherine, I cared so much it was killing me to leave you there." Catherine shifted closer, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We found our way to each other anyway," she said. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Wade said. He tilted her face up and kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. Winter came again, a full year since Catherine had nearly died in the snow. But this winter was completely different. She was warm and safe in Wade's cabin, their cabin now. She had a home, a husband, a life she had built with her own hands and choices. On the anniversary of the day Wade had found her, Catherine stood at the window watching snow fall, feeling contemplative. Wade came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How much can change in a year," Catherine said. "How close I came to missing all of this because I was too focused on what I thought I was supposed to do." "I am grateful every day that you changed your mind," Wade said. "I cannot imagine my life without you now." Catherine turned in his arms, looking up at him with love and certainty. "I have something to tell you," she said. Wade's eyes searched her face. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby," Catherine said. "I am fairly certain. All the signs are there." Wade's face went through a series of expressions too fast for Catherine to track. Surprise, joy, fear, wonder. "A baby," he repeated. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Catherine said, laughing at his expression. "Are you happy?" "Happy," Wade said. He picked her up and spun her around, careful even in his excitement, then set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Catherine, I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled." They spent the evening making plans, talking about the future. They would need to add on to the cabin, create more space. They would need supplies, clothes for the baby, a cradle. Sarah would help, Catherine was certain. Mrs. Chen, too. They had built a community in Walla Walla, people who cared about them. The winter passed slowly, with Catherine's pregnancy progressing. She felt well most of the time, though tired in a way she had never experienced before. Wade was attentive to the point of being overprotective, always worrying that she was doing too much, working too hard. Spring arrived, and with it, new life. The calves were born, the chickens started laying again, the garden was planted. And in early June, on a warm afternoon with Sarah in attendance to help with the birth, Catherine brought their son into the world. They named him Samuel Wade Erickson. Samuel for Catherine's father, Wade for his own. The baby had Wade's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair, and Catherine fell in love with him instantly and completely. Holding her son while Wade looked on with wonder in his face, Catherine thought about the strange path that had led her here. A desperate response to an advertisement, a blizzard, a near-death experience. Any one of those things going differently, and she would have ended up in a completely different life, probably an unhappy one, but instead she was here. She had a husband who loved her, a son to raise, a life that was hard but meaningful. She had found her home not in a place, but in the people who filled it with love and laughter. The years passed, bringing changes and challenges. Their son Samuel grew strong and healthy, a curious boy who toddled after his father wherever Wade would let him. 2 years after Samuel was born, they had a daughter, whom they named Rose for Catherine's mother. She was a quieter child than her brother, thoughtful and observant with Wade's steady temperament. The ranch prospered. Wade's hard work and Catherine's careful management paid off. They were never rich, but they were comfortable. They added on to the cabin, creating more space for their growing family. Wade built Catherine a real kitchen with a proper stove, and she joked that it was better than anything she had in Boston. Sarah Green became a permanent fixture in their lives, visiting frequently and becoming Aunt Sarah to the children. She eventually married a surveyor who settled in Walla Walla, and she and Catherine remained close friends for life. Mrs. Chen taught Catherine to make proper Chinese dumplings, and always had a red envelope with a coin for the children during the Lunar New Year. Even the relationship with the rest of the town improved. People came to respect Wade and Catherine Erickson, to see them as part of the fabric of the community. Samuel Hutchins eventually remarried, a widow from Helena who seemed better suited to his particular temperament. He and Catherine maintained a polite but distant relationship. She bore him no ill will, and he seemed to have accepted that things had worked out for the best for everyone involved. The years brought sorrows too. One hard winter, they lost half their herd to disease. The summer Catherine was pregnant with their third child, a daughter they named Alice. Wade broke his leg and was laid up for weeks. There were lean times and hard times, moments when Catherine wondered if they would make it through, but they always did. Together, they weathered every storm, every challenge. They grew older together, Wade's dark hair going gray at the temples, Catherine's face gaining lines around her eyes and mouth. But those lines came from laughter and smiling, from a life well lived. Their children grew up and eventually started families of their own. Samuel took over the ranch when Wade's health started to decline in his 50s. Rose married a banker's son and moved to Helena, though she visited often. Alice, their youngest, had her mother's restless spirit and her father's steady determination. She went east to become a teacher, something that would have been nearly impossible for a woman of Catherine's generation, but was just becoming possible for women of Alice's. Wade and Catherine grew old together in the cabin where they had spent their first night as husband and wife, where they had raised their children, where they had built a life. The cabin had been expanded and improved over the years, but the heart of it remained the same. The bedroom where Wade had held Catherine through that first terrible night, warming her with his own body and whispering "Stay with me" over and over. One winter evening, when Wade was 62 and Catherine was 57, they sat by the fire as they had done thousands of times before. Their children were all grown and gone, living their own lives, though they visited often. It was just the two of them again, as it had been in the beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked suddenly. "Choosing this life, choosing me?" Catherine looked up from her knitting, surprised. "Where is this coming from?" "I was just thinking," Wade said. "You could have had an easier life. If you had married Hutchins, you would have lived in town, had a comfortable house, never had to work as hard as you have here." "I would have been miserable," Catherine said firmly. "Wade Erickson, I have never regretted choosing you, not for one single day. Not even when we lost the herd, or when I broke my leg and could not help with anything, or during all those years of hard work and worry. Not even then," Catherine said. She set aside her knitting and came to sit beside him, taking his hand. His fingers were gnarled now with arthritis, the hands of a man who had worked hard his whole life. She brought them to her lips and kissed them gently. "You know what I remember most clearly from that first day?" Catherine asked. "When you found me in the snow, I remember your voice cutting through the darkness, telling me to stay with you, and I remember thinking, even though I was barely conscious that I wanted to stay, that your voice was the only thing worth staying for." "I was so afraid you would die," Wade admitted. "I had never been so afraid in my life." "But I did not die," Catherine said. "I stayed, and I have been staying with you ever since, and I will stay with you until the end. That is what love is, Wade. It is choosing to stay, every single day, even when things are hard." Wade pulled her close, and they sat together by the fire, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Catherine died first, in her sleep one night when she was 71. Wade woke up to find her gone, peaceful and still beside him. He held her hand and cried, the first time their children had ever seen their father weep. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone marker that read Catherine Thorne Erickson, beloved wife and mother. Wade lived another 3 years after that, long enough to see 2 more grandchildren born, long enough to know that the ranch and the family they had built together would continue. His children worried that he would fade without Catherine, but Wade remained steady and strong until the end. When Wade died in his sleep at 74, his children found a letter on his bedside table, addressed to all of them. In it, he told them the story of how he had met their mother, about finding her in the blizzard and carrying her for miles while whispering, "Stay with me." He told them about those first days in the cabin, about almost losing her to Samuel Hutchins, about the moment Catherine had shown up at his door and changed his life forever. He ended the letter with instructions to bury him next to Catherine on the hill, and with one final message: "Love is a choice, but it is also a gift. Your mother was the greatest gift of my life. Choose wisely, and when you find that gift, never let it go." They buried Wade next to Catherine on a clear spring day, when the Montana landscape was coming back to life with green grass and wildflowers. The whole family gathered, along with half the town of Walla Walla. Sarah Green, now an old woman herself, stood at the graveside and remembered the day she had driven Catherine out to Wade's ranch, remembered the feeling that she was helping write a love story. Years passed. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The cabin was preserved, becoming a family landmark, a place where new generations of Ericksons came to learn about their history. The story of Wade and Catherine became family legend, told and retold, embellished in some ways but true in all the ways that mattered. The story of two people who found each other in a blizzard, who chose each other when it would have been easier to walk away. The story of a man who whispered, "Stay with me," to a dying woman, and then spent the rest of his life making sure she never regretted staying. The story of a love that was hard-won and deeply cherished, that lasted until the end and beyond. And on winter days, when the snow fell thick and fast over the Montana landscape, people said you could sometimes hear a voice on the wind, steady and sure, whispering, "Stay with me, stay with me, stay with me forever."